Market Insights through Anthropology, a deep dive into consumer culture with our speaker, Tim Malefyt. With over 15 years in advertising as a corporate anthropologist, Tim Malefyt has transformed brands by merging academic insights with marketing practices. At BBDO worldwide, he steered major brands like AT&T and PepsiCo with his ethnographic group, Cultural Discoveries. As a clinical associate professor at Fordham University's marketing department, he integrates real-life case studies, emphasizing experiential learning. This session dives deep into his unique approach, bridging consumer culture insights with actionable marketing strategies. Join us for an enlightening discourse from an industry academia luminary.
I'm very excited today. I always say that, but I genuinely am always excited to speak to the expert, specifically this one, because I do have a history with him. He was one of my professors at Parsons, and he still is a professor after 15 years. 15 years in working for BBDO in marketing. So now he's returned back to professor at Fordham. But nonetheless, I'm very excited to have you on the show.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you for having me here. Happy to be here.
Okay, so let's get right into it. I know that most entrepreneurs are not that familiar with anthropology, so it might be a term that scares them. And I'd love for you to just maybe frame what cultural analysis is and why it's magical for entrepreneurs to understand.
Sure, happy to. We're so familiar with predominantly psychological analysis. Everyone knows psychology as a form of analysis. We use in business Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's been kicked around for a while. People know, need states and, extrovert, introvert, obsessive compulsive disorder, some of these kind of terms that are thrown around. But anthropology gives something different. It really gets into this concept of culture. And what's so valuable about culture is that it really is the things that are taken for granted. It's often invisible. So, anthropology, looking at culture, it's the structure of shared meaning that gives coherence to everyday lives that we're about. And, we just assume things that are culturally knowledgeable. I'd like to give you an example. We did some research not too long ago when I was at BBDO for mobile oil on their synthetic oil. It's better for the environment because it's synthetic. It's not petroleum based. It's a 100% synthetic oil, but it's like 3-4 times as much for motor oil for a car than regular motor oil. So why would people buy this? Mm-hmm. So we went into the pitch. This was a pitch for mobile oil. And we had some psychological background that said, in people's need states, it gives them a sense of confidence and comfort when they change the oil, especially using synthetic, because it's better for the engine and it wears better and so forth. So this idea of confidence was what the psychological profile gave. We went out and we talked, and this is another element of anthropology is not taking survey information high level, but really getting into the context of where people change their oil and either taking it to a Jiffy Lube or taking it to the automotive dealer or doing it yourself. We visited all these locations and talked with owners of cars about this. And we didn't ask questions like, how does changing an oil make you feel? Those are kind of psychological questions. We pulled back, which is very anthropological, and just said a very basic assumption, or try not to assume anything. What is a car? Why is a car important to you? And that almost seemed dumb, like what do you mean? A car? You don't know? But we found out really interesting things that people have in American culture, such an attachment to the car. They name their cars. Cars have personalities. They're not, they're intimate entities. They're not just objects. They're part of people's family. People talk about a car as part of the family. Mm-hmm. So with this in mind, we saw that changing the oil, and we got this from a mechanic too. A car might need new tires. The ball joints are bad. The brakes are bad. The exhaust is falling off. But they'll take it in for an oil change because they feel it's the one thing they can do for the car that gives back for all the car does for them. So it's this idea of reciprocity. Let me give back to you for you being such a good car for me. And it's very personalized. So we gave that information, this insight to Mobil Oil. And it said, let our family take care of your family, part of Mobil Oil with the synthetic. And it was a very different kind of insight because, again, not assuming anything. We really wanted to know the structure of what oil changing is in the larger context of having a car in America.
That's such a good example. And it's something that resonated deeply with me because I often find that I'm the one in the room who asks the stupid questions, right? But they are so insightful. And sometimes you really do have to step back to understand what are the biases, what are the, preconceived notions that we're working from, so that you can potentially provide a much deeper insight. So I love that you said that because it's like, yes, I'm not doing the wrong thing.
Well, it's interesting because anthropologists have used this for everything, even cleaning products. Anthropologists have gone in to study how you keep a house clean. And they don't say, they don't ask what's the feeling you get from cleaning a floor, for instance,
Right.
for a floor cleaner. They ask, what does clean mean? How is a clean floor different from a clean table? And that's a huge difference there in American culture. Mary Douglas is an anthropologist who wrote about a book, I'll give her a plug, Purity and Danger. She talked about boundaries and how we understand meaning in terms of these boundaries or breaking boundaries. And a clean table is different from a clean floor. You can walk on a clean floor, but take your shoes off and put them on a clean table, people cringe, because you don't put shoes on a table. And that violates that idea of a cultural category, of a boundary. But that's just assumed. It's, again, these are the things with culture that it's often just taken for granted, which is why anthropology, here's a nice kind of phrase, making the strange familiar. How do you make the familiar strange? Actually, it works both ways. How do you take something that's very familiar and make it strange?
Right. Yeah. Because you're often faced with, and bringing it back to entrepreneurship in the sense, we have a pretty wide spectrum of business owners and they're not all selling the same thing. Right. And in some cases, it's a very mundane product, like a household product, so understanding how you position that with something that has value beyond its functional use.
That's a good point. So that you can take it to products, but you also look at this idea of culture in an organization. In every culture, every organization has its own culture. And, your McKinsey specialists come in and say, oh, yeah, let's examine corporate culture and let's improve your corporate culture. But typically what they mean by corporate culture, they're talking to C-suite executives, and it's really kind of a top-down approach. They're picking values that they want for the corporation and forcing it down. When anthropologists study culture in an organization, they're looking at it from the ground up all the way through. What's the overall cultural narrative? And then what are the subcultures that go on in place? And I talk about these subcultures or even little tribes that take place. I remember at BBDO, we had a running club, and this was people who like to run. And since our office was on 52nd Street, lunchtime we'd go to Central Park and run. But although it was very hierarchical in a way. You had this running club that brought in basic level brand managers with higher level C-suite organizers and C-suite executives and so forth. So this was a great opportunity to really a subculture within the larger organization, that a way to get ideas around and talk about things that the culture outside wouldn't maybe recognize. And it's very subtle and not really talked about. So, from an entrepreneur point of view, understanding what your cultural narrative is, but also what are these subcultures, these little tribal groups that form, that's really critical to understanding success and where innovation comes from, where ideas can come from.
Yeah, I'd be interested, this is sort of steering from, but it just came to my head that so many startups might not have that large of an organization where the subcultures just naturally form. But they do sort of try and create these workshops or retreats for the business, and sometimes employees feel like it's like an obligation as opposed to this natural way of being. But how could one start to consider the atmosphere that allows these subcultures to organically appear?
That's a good question. First of all, starting off with a entrepreneurial business, you're starting off with something. It's critical for entrepreneurs to really help develop an origin story that they're powerful. They really flow through an organization because they're really what you're about, kind of giving how people have worked together, and it's usually top to bottom, people who have pulled up their bootstraps and made an organization work. So it's motivating for people to know this origin story, and that will change and shift as the organization grows, and that's fine. But these narratives are powerful. Companies that forget the narratives often lose their way. I love that example of Lego. That was a powerful company, but then they tried to become digitized in the early 2000s, and that threw them off. But getting back to their story, their narrative of inspiring builders of tomorrow is really what they're about, their hands-on approach. And again, so understanding where you're coming from, your workers, where their ideas and their resources is really going to be critical for a business to succeed. Another colleague of mine, Elizabeth Bridey, worked at General Motors. Here's a great example. And she was an anthropologist who did corporate studies, culture studies within organizations. She talked about the different tribes of GM. And one thing that she found was employee innovation. And this was outside of top management. Top management didn't know about this. GM was doing their total quality management. And I think in the 80s and the 90s, they really pushed it for total quality management as they were falling behind. So they were pushing the company to employees to be more efficient. Well, Elizabeth Bridey went down and found this workaround that a lot of the line employees were doing. They didn't want to, they knew they had to improve performance, and they weren't given help from top management. They were kind of, felt like they had to keep improving. So they kept their own, they created their own system where they take parts that were extra and they'd hide them and stash them. And they had their own private system of inventory, and they'd give them out to different workers as they needed them, therefore keeping up production going. But this showed a great level of on-the-ground innovation that top management didn't know about, keeping the corporation going, kind of this small system, tribal system of exchange of spare parts that they had that they could find and store and give out as needed, but very inventive. So a lot of times, corporations, if you can tap into these tribal groups and look at their sources of innovation, they have resources to help an organization run better that sometimes top management is not aware of.
Yeah, that's also a really good point. But so let's maybe on the flip of the spectrum of the audience. So we have the corporations who should be looking internally, like within their own teams and their subsections, their departments, and how these cultural analysis are forming. But what about for pre-seed or startups who are looking to tap into a new demographic or a different type of consumer? How do they start to think about the ethnographic studies that they could potentially use to better understand who they're marketing to?
That's a good point. Really good point. Where maybe this goes back to the original, the value of doing ethnographic work and conducted by an anthropologist is that we have big data and data analytics that give us a fabulous larger picture of what's happening, when it's happening, how many times people are doing something, all this kind of data points of people's activity, consumer behavior. But it rarely gets to those deeper issues of why. And why is really something that you need to get down at the granular level and understand the context of what's happening. Context tells you what's happening. Context is everything, and you have to be there and interpret it. It's not just Seeing things aren't obvious. You have to see what is taken for granted, where there might be blocks. People, here's a big thing that an issue with consumer insights, and I came up with this again and again. People don't always tell you on surveys and other data points what they're really doing. There's always a disconnect between what people say and what they do, what they actually do. A great example of this is at BBDO, one of our clients, we used a lot of ethnographic work, was Campbell's Soup. And they came up with, we irked at this. I worked with another anthropologist. They came up with mom's dinner dilemma, dinners. What does mom do at 5, 6 o'clock in the evening when she has to get the dinner ready for the family? So right away, there's a pretext of a problem, dinner dilemma. And they had collected survey information where mothers talked about gathering food ideas and where they got it from. We went into the homes, different mothers, watched them cook, fathers too sometimes, and watched them prepare meals for their family. What was so interesting for us, and they didn't say this in their interviews when we had talked with these moms, we watched how creative and improvisational the mothers were as they prepared their meals. They would make small adjustments. They'd take a recipe, they'd even following a recipe, oh, my kids don't like cumin, so I'm going to substitute it with cinnamon. Or knowing the different people, I want to make this into, instead of a meat, I'm going to make this vegetarian. They'd make substitutions. So we watched a lot of improvisation from these mothers cooking. That wasn't, they just said, well, this is just how I do things. I know my family. In other words, in their meal preparation, they were recreating the family every time they would prepare a meal. They were developing this image, the family together, having a good time together, even if it's a 15-minute meal. Meals are usually very quick, but the idea of knowing everyone's taste and adjusting the recipe for that, we would not have gotten that from survey work because they don't think about it or they don't inform that. And we'd say, you're being very creative here. Oh yeah, I'm making adaptations. So that was very insightful. Then we went back to Campbell's and said, mothers are networking with other mothers. They're telling about how to get recipes on emailing, or they're meeting friends for lunch, or they're at work telling what they've done with recipes. There was a lot of exchange of information of recipes that we saw among these women. So Campbell's had very notable chefs. They have an incredible kitchen that they use and different chefs that are employed there. And they had their recipes developed by these chefs. And we said, that's kind of a top-down approach. Why don't we flip this? What we saw is the network of women talking about recipes and making adjustments. Why don't we have it a bottom-up and having women recommend recipes and make adjustments in what they did? And they changed the system around on their website. It was far more effective for inclusivity and participation from other women. So we're taking cultural knowledge that is not talked about. We had to observe it and implementing it into the strategy of redeveloping the website. It was very effective.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And there's a couple of questions that are running through my mind because I'm thinking to myself, this is obviously very valuable for any brand or business who's looking to sell a new product or understand why something isn't selling. It's oftentimes than not, they think it's the product. But I also believe that, there's a misconnect in the communication, right? Either the expectations that are being communicated aren't aligned with the actual values or the desires of the person. And so, there's a misconnect there. And I'm glad that you're illustrating this through your examples, because it's definitely something that I believe a lot of businesses miss out on when they think of doing market research. It is very, I'm thinking of small businesses. It is very limited to surveys, right? And a lot of experts prefer focus groups, but there's so much that's missed in these contained ways of collecting data, because they're very formal and they're not accurate to what actually happens in their real lives. So, leading off of that thought, I think some of the entrepreneurs are probably asking, who do I go to? How do I start to do this to have a better understanding? I mean, obviously you can't just get this wealth of knowledge in an hour session. You need to go to an expert who could do that.
Well, use the big data. That is valuable. I never say it's one or the other. It's always the combination. Use the big data to understand the larger issues, the larger trends, but then always get a granular picture of. I teach this consumer insights at Fordham, and tell them, get an understanding of your data. I had students come in and say, I work in a company and we have all these data points, and I have them go out and do some ethnographic work and meet some of their customers. And I've heard people say, I've studied my customer for years and this is the first time I've actually met them in person. It's always a shock to me. But yeah, even focus groups can be misleading because it's not the context of what things are happening. Real quick example here is the famous study of how Gogurt came to be developed by anthropological insights. I don't know if you know that. But
no, I just remember Gogurt when I was younger.
Yeah, well,
they kind of disappeared.
Surveyed mothers and again talked to women in focus groups about. Women in focus groups talked about the importance of a breakfast for their children. Oh yes, and every mother, said yes, it's important. It's the most important meal of the day, and you give them, the balanced meal, and it's important to have it wholesome and all that. No mother would disagree with that. Of course, everyone in the focus group said that. And then some anthropologists went to a home at 6:30 in the morning, and they saw the chaos that was going on in this mom's home. And working moms, the husband had already left, and the two kids, she's trying to get them dressed and trying to get them out the door. And, one of the kids didn't eat breakfast, skipped breakfast. The other kid had a quick bowl of sugary cereal, and the mother had prepared a meal. She did what she said, but then had to dump it down the disposal because nobody ate it, and then took off to school. And the anthropologist watched the one kid in school who had missed breakfast eat her lunch at 10:30 in the morning because she was hungry. So that's the reality. Even though mothers have good intentions and say, yes, I feed my kids a good breakfast, the reality is something else. And that's where they came up with the idea. The anthropologist in design anthropology had helped recommend the idea of Gogurt as something that was portable. So watch what people say, careful, because on surveys and other things, they'll say certain things. Who is not going to be a good mom and say, yes, I feed my kids. Breakfast is the most important meal. It's really important. But then in actuality, in context, again, you see how difficult that is in reality. So that's where really thoughtful insights can come in and help new product design.
Yeah. So that brings up another point. I mean, I think from trying to hit both angles at the same time, if you're, a low budget and you really don't have the reach to perform deep research, maybe some practical action steps that they could implement, like meeting their customer and, how do they even go about asking the right questions as opposed to how does this make you feel? Right. So that's one thing. And then on the other end, for maybe large organizations, I'm sure they're wondering when is a good point in their design process or in their product development process to include these insights, right? So how do they know when it's a problem and they should implement it, or if it's something that they should already have at the foundation of whenever they're creating a product?
I mean, hopefully as you say, for a large organization, they're keeping tabs on all levels of where their employees are. Customer, culture is expressed everywhere in the lunchroom, in meetings, in informal gatherings, and hopefully they can be taking reads of these and see where their problems lie, where power flows, and where there are issues and problems of not what's going on. You have design thinking that came along that said, we can solve problems. That was really kind of a big thing for a while. It still is. And it tends to fix things, sees a problem, fix it, but it's very much at the implementation level. It doesn't, anthropological analysis of the culture and the subcultures and the tribes that are going on in an organization really gets more into the higher up issues of why. And you want to get to the cause of the problems. Are different groups not talking to one another? Senior management saying we want ideas and then not that was a case study where, senior management is expecting junior management to come up with ideas, but then not giving them any instructions on how to do that. So there was a block in communication. So, as I just mentioned, culture is available and presented and practiced, played out all through the organization in all kinds of meetings. The meeting is a great example. How do meetings take place? Who speaks? Who is silent? How do people participate? Anthropologists have studied how meetings in the U.S. are different from meetings in Germany and meetings in Japan, and how, is there expected in a meeting a level of consensus, or is it hierarchical where the one person speaks and only they're the ones who have to make the decision? Or is it something that, you have consensus, or does everyone have to agree? These are all different dynamics that express that notion of the culture of an organization. And how you facilitate that and how you encourage that can make a big difference.
Yeah. That's definitely something that the larger corporations should be having their thumb on, I guess, for lack of a way of putting it. I think probably something that could be helpful for them is understanding what they could put into place to have a better understanding of what's going on, because I'm not sure that all of them do have that. So that would be helpful for them. But then on the other end, I'm thinking about the smaller businesses, so we could start there. Like, what are the practical ways of, quickly implementing this type of strategy in your business? So how could you start today, begin to address these, or not address, but understand the cultural analysis, both of your business and of your consumers?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So again, taking feedback, listening to where problems lie, and then, really addressing those, but understanding that, how do people feel? Culture is really in a business is really about a sense of belonging. How do people get a sense of belonging to an organization? Where's that blocked, and how could an organization better implement that? I know the issues of going back to work now are a big thing. Zoom culture, well, that's what I'm used to as a format. It's really difficult to, we taught a year through this, but it's hard to get a feeling of connection and community in Zoom. There's so much that happens in the office, in context, from coffee gatherings to meetings to offsites or after work activities to lunchrooms to whatever you're doing. And, that sense of belonging, how does the narrative of what the community, the culture is about play through, and how do people feel that sense of belonging and express that? So, the artifacts that people are wearing, the shirts, the badges, the gestures, all that kind of, there's litany of different activities that people have that make them feel that are implicit, that make them feel part of an organization. And I think it's critical that upper management know that, and know how they can encourage that sense of belonging and feel what they're about. Fordham, for instance, I'll just give a quick sense. It's, care for the whole person. We're a Jesuit university, so that has implemented, we kind of play that out top to bottom, both in administration, how we have, sessions to listen to what faculty are about, to classroom teaching. How do professors interact with students and offer time to connect with students and help them in their job hunts afterward? So that care for the whole person is like a motto, but also part of the corporate identity of what belonging to Fordham's about. And that's something that permeates through the university. People are pretty much happy to be there for that. And students come away from that. They talk about, going to taking a class at Fordham and graduating and getting a degree, in this sense, there was more help than I ever expected. It was that sense of care. And so we're hearing that in feedback. And that's what, I would hope bigger organizations can instill with their culture as well.
So, yeah, so what I'm hearing is that, obviously there's this character for every entity, whether it's a small organization or a bigger institution. And that comes from, I guess, it evolves. It's not always the same, but that resonates through each being who's added up to create the whole entity. So that makes sense. But I'm wondering, so either inside the culture of the organization or outside in the consumer world, what are the indicators that business owners should be looking at? Like, what are the actual metrics or evaluations that could help determine whether or not they're lacking in a certain area, or there's a potential opportunity that they should be looking into?
That's good. And again, that follows back with that, the cultural narrative that runs through. I think of the great example of Starbucks that really, started off with a bang and then had trouble in the late 2000s, and Schultz had to come back as CEO and kind of take over for the company. And again, they had, he brought all the top managers together in one setting and said, we've lost track. I think some of the metrics that they noticed that they were trying to be something that they weren't. They were expanding into new foods and new services, and they got away from that, inspiring and nurturing the human spirit. What is it? One cup of coffee, one neighborhood at a time. And when they got back to that, that really improved metrics. They cast off a lot of the other. They had too many line extensions. They had too many other areas that they were going into, and they kind of forgot what their core business was about. And returning to that was really essential for that large organization. But they also, had to respect that each manager has to understand that and live that out. And they were included in being part of that corporate culture to understand what that was about. So I think that's a nice example of where you can get lost and lose your way to what your business model, but also corporate culture is really about.
So it's not just about recognizing opportunities. It's also about when you're overextending yourself as a business with too many opportunities.
Rejecting the opportunities. Actually, it was too much. It was not
right.
what Starbucks was about, for instance. So yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I have a twofold question. So in your experience of, studying, recognizing, analyzing consumer culture over the years, how have you seen that it's shifted, and also, or where it's going, but also, have you recognized that there's, a tendency for cultures to change within the last quarter of the year because of the holiday season? Does that have an effect on?
Well, that's a good question. Culture, I'll go back to basic anthropology. Culture is not a thing, an entity. Culture is always moving. It's fluid. It's always changing. So the culture of the United States is shifting. You have narratives, but then you have new narratives that are competing narratives. You have new groups coming in. So like any business too, the culture of a business it has to shift and change and adapt. It's like, think of an agricultural model. We've changed with climate change. You have to adjust your garden. You have to adjust your watering. You have to adjust your inputs to help a garden grow agriculturally. And likewise, in culture of your business, you have to take in new inputs, new changes. How is your business model adapting? A little thing with Starbucks, their top seller now is not hot coffee, it's iced coffee. Just little changes in what consumer preferences are. That's always shifting. So as an anthropologist, you're always looking at what your customer is into and communicating with them up close, not looking at the data points, but kind of understanding what they dislike about a place. What are new things coming along that change their point of view, and you adapt your culture for that. You're always adjusting your culture of your business.
Yeah. Do you recognize a particular shift during the holiday seasons across all industries, or does it really depend on what the product is and what what's actually being sold?
So when you talk about the holiday seasons, I mean, there's kind of a change in the air, literally, with the season that we're in, but also the sense of, we're getting towards the holidays. There's holidays are ritualistic, from Halloween to Thanksgiving to Christmas, or however you're celebrating that, to New Year's. There, each one of these has a different kind of sense of a ritual to them. But they're gathering, they're reflecting, they're reinterpreting, re-examining who you are. So I think there are opportunities for corporations to kind of re-examine how they're interacting with the world. But it's a much more time of renewal, reflectiveness in the holidays, and I think that kind of is the atmosphere we're talking about now. That's certainly when the school season begins in the fall. That's kind of like the beginning of our year, and that is the sense of newness that comes about. So are you asking how this impacts business?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking from the perspective of the entrepreneurs. I mean, it's very wide, but nonetheless, if you have a business, whether it's retail, e-commerce, you're looking to, sort of peak on the holiday season as people are gearing up to get gifts for their family and all of that. But I think you sort of framed, I mean, the umbrella frame does capture it in the sense that it's a ritual. So understanding what's actually being celebrated routinely and how that applies to your customer, because it's obviously different for each demographic and subculture.
The key thing with rituals, and anthropologists love to study rituals, is that they are transformative. You go into a ritual in one state, one position, one mindset, however you want to look at this, and you come out different. You come out changed. You come out transformed. The ritual of going to college, you come in as kind of in between an adult and a child, and you come out ready for the world to enter the workforce. Or the ritual of marriage, two people are separate and join as one as they come out. And you can look at the rituals. Halloween is a ritual of playfulness, fun. Fear gets turned into costumes and pleasure with that. For the kids, the candy indulgence. Thanksgiving is a ritual of coming together, re-examining what family's about. Christmas is the sense of the rebirth, or however you're interpreting that. And then New Year's is like, new start. You have a start to the year. Everyone's joining Weight Watchers for the first few days, and then they drop out. But that sense of a new year ahead, that transforming to something new and exciting ahead of you. So rituals are powerful ways are transformative. And we did that once at BBDO. We had talked about brand rituals, how you can try to look at, a brand that you have in a ritual is far more powerful than a brand out of a ritual. So we would look at compare Miller Lite drinking a beer to having a Guinness. And Guinness was one brand we looked at, and we really worked on the whole ritual of the perfect pour, So it's much more sensorial, experiential, having a beer is not, the Guinness is not just the taste, it's the whole having it, the perfect pour set in that. It's interesting, Build-A-Bear is like you design a bear. It's not just getting something off the shelf of Walmart. Or Disney is very ritualistic and transformative. You come out of it with memories that you take away. So for entrepreneurs too, if you can locate your service or your brand in a ritual, it's far more powerful.
That's a really, really good insight. And also I would like to add, just like as a side note, that these rituals, the brand rituals that you're referring to, they're always tied to a strategy that integrates the entire business, in the sense like, what did you say? The Guinness pour. I remember when I used to work. Yeah, the perfect pour for Guinness.
It's exactly 2 minutes long, or
is
119 seconds. Yes.
I should know that. I should know that. I remember when I was younger, I worked in a bar, and they had representatives that would come in to share and present to anyone who was working in the restaurant the perfect pour. So I remember this, but that was that's tied to an entire process. So they're training the employees who then go out to train the distributors, and it's something that you have to integrate on all levels of your cultural business, which is why it's important to have both your thumb on the internal culture and the external culture.
And
So I love this.
you can create GIFs, you can Instagram it, you can share it in social media. So it's that experience is very shareable as well too, which is also a great thing about rituals.
Yeah. So I know that you're pre-launching your next book, and I'm excited to get it. So let's take a second to talk about what awaits us. I know it's called business, right? It's specifically for businesses.
Business anthropology. So I'm an anthropologist who works in the corporate setting, and years of usually mostly market research, but this covers business anthropology is a broad field because you have anthropologists in organizational culture and change, you have anthropologists in design, very powerful. You have anthropologists in consumer research and user experience. You have anthropologists working with AI. AI programs, deep learning. The problem with the algorithms is not the algorithm itself, but how do you create an ethical algorithm? How do you teach it to look at people differently? Algorithms are going to be used for a police state and so forth. So how can anthropologists come in and write programs for AI? So this book covers all of that. I talk about that. And I talk about, anthropology's use in all these business fields. What differentiates business anthropology from academic anthropology is that business anthropology looks for solutions, change. It looks to create intervention. So it's not just simply, here's an issue, here's a culture, and this is interesting, we can look at it, but how can we make a better good out of this? It really ties into ESG values. How can we help the world better? How can we design better parks in a city? How can we work at lunch programs for inner city schools? How can we design and work with the governments there? So the civil bodies. So design and business anthropology is looking for how to make this change, implement these change, and make these solutions possible. And then, of course, in consumer research, how do you really understand the value, creating value for your customers through really understanding what the brand experience is about? How do you tap into that deeper understanding of how a brand can really add value to people's lives and make them and really make it valuable for them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, you have the application of anthropology both within your business when you're researching your clients, your consumers, whoever, and also the way in which your business evolves. So how you create solutions to whether they're societal problems or, problems within your own product or service. So it's very applicable to any operating business.
It's win-win for the business. You want to have happy customers, people who enjoy and like your product or service, and it's applicable to the customers as well. So you want to be able to, make a difference with the products and services in people's lives. Brands are good, and the good ones, and can improve people's lives, and people share and develop relationships with the brands and with other people through brands. So that's the social connectedness of what this is about.
Yeah, it really is the keystone of intangible value, right? Understanding what isn't maybe substantially tactical, but it has a value that other brands cannot produce, and that's what makes you different or unique. So,
and then
highly
hopefully
recommend.
People will like your brand so much they tell others about it. So that's really the most powerful advertising is not advertising, is having users enjoy it so much they share and tell other people about your brand on their own. So.
Yeah. I'd love to get into AI and social digital anthropology and all of that, but I know that we're tight on time, so I'll leave it to anyone who's interested in that to check out the book. And that's coming out December 15th, right? I think
Yes,
that's what I was.
yes.
I wasn't sure if it was because I was new.
Business Anthropology, the basics. It's Rutledge. I think you'll give the web link for that if you could.
Yeah, we'll put it in the chat.
Yes, and yes, I welcome to here. I'm at Fordham University, Gabelli School of Business, and would look forward to meeting any entrepreneurs who are interested in talking further.
Yeah. Okay. So if you are interested in getting in touch with Tim, you can use the QR code or the link. We'll also put the link to the book so you can see what it's all about before it comes out. And before you go, I want to thank you obviously for your time, your generosity, and your work, because I don't know how often you get accolades for this, but it is probably, for me personally, one of the most interesting aspects of entrepreneurship. This and behavioral economics. I think it's because they're both so, they just are very tied to people and how they behave and how they evolve all the time. So it's not like you just learn it once and you know it. It's ever evolving. So I love this. I love your work. And I'm so thankful that there are people like you who really devote their whole lives to studying this and sharing the information with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Appreciate it.
And also, before you go, surprise. I have one surprise question that I've been asking all the speakers. So my mission with Geen is to encourage other entrepreneurs to network. Mm-hmm. So I believe that if you are collaborative, it's easier for you to rise, and it's easier, actually a quicker path to, navigating the obstacles that come with entrepreneurship. So that's my mission. And I'm doing that through this summit and these interviews, but also I thought, it'd be a good idea to demonstrate by leading. And so I'm testing the theory of 6 degrees of separation. Yeah. And I'm asking all of the speakers, who do you know who could potentially put me in touch with someone or himself or someone who knows him, Elon Musk. I'm looking to have a conversation with him about AI in the near future because of something that he said recently that, so that's I think most of our entrepreneurs are on this 90-day sprint to increase their numbers. I'm on a 90-day sprint to test the 6 degrees of separation and see if I can get in touch with Elon Musk to have a conversation. You don't have to share it here. You don't have to share the answer here, but please keep it in mind, and I will report to our VIP members what happens, whether or not I follow my face or the theory ends up being true and we're all separated by 6 degrees of separation.
Interesting. Maybe we'll see if it works out. Keep me posted.
Okay. Well, that's part of it. I mean, if it works out, whoever is involved in the process, everyone that I've asked to help will be invited to the call. So it'll be one big Zoom party if it happens. Don't hold me to it. I don't know what's going to happen. But yeah. Again, thank you for coming on the show. It was a pleasure, and all the best.
Thank you, Erica. Take care.